Hello. Yes. Oh, scared me. All right. We are so glad to have everyone with us here locally as well as the live stream community. We want to let's welcome all the live stream community too. We just looked. We have quite a few cities around the world that are live streaming right now. Let me ask you this. How many of you have never heard Pesach speak before here now? Okay, quite a few. Okay. How many of you have been to Israel? Yes, that's great. How many of you love the Torah? Yay! I was waiting to see if you raised your hands, Pesach. No. All right. Well, one of the things I want to bring up, who knows what today is? Shabbat. What tribe is assigned to this month? Asher. That's exactly right. What is a famous holiday that happens every Shabbat? Tu B'Shavat. That's exactly right, which means the 15th of Shavat. And it's all about what? Feeding the birds and the trees, the 7 species of Israel, fruit, planting a tree, feeding the birds. But there's one thing about birds that the Bible talks about that's very, very important, especially this month. In Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 20, it says, a bird of the air will carry your voice, and that which hath wings will tell the matter. So you better be careful what you say. But guess what? A little bird gave me a top secret message, and I could not believe it. Did you guys know next week is Pesach Wolicki's birthday? Not only that, he is going to be 50 years old on 05. He will be 50, the 50. So we want to wish him happy birthday as all these balloons come up. Look at that one. There he is. Right there. Let's sing happy birthday to Pesach. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Pesach. Happy birthday to you. Look what a little birdie told me. Yes, exactly. He's from Israel. How long were you in Israel? Born there? And how long did you live there? 42 years. Pretty awesome. Well, we're just so glad that you're here with us tonight. What a blessing. Okay, what I'm going to do is turn my computer off now. I had my fun. And I'm going to unplug this, and I'm going to plug his laptop in. But I just had to embarrass Pesach. Make sure I get this plugged in correctly here. Well, you're just a sweetie. Hey, Jill, it doesn't plug into your HDMI. You may have to find another. Maybe it's on the other side. I'll let you plug it in. You got it? Okay, good. Yeah, let's get them set up ready. Okay, first off, I just wanted to say Pesach Wolicki and I have known each other for how many years now? 5 years, something like that. He was with a organization trying to build relationships between Christian and Jews. I believe it was started by Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, wasn't it? Okay, and he worked with Rabbi David Krupman, who is another person who we know who has spoken here several times. And then recently, he has left that organization, and now he's volunteering to work with another organization. I don't know how much he wants to share of what all is going on, but I just want to say that he's been here. How many times have you spoken here? Quite a few times. 5th time, something like that. And we've done little TV interviews here. I wish we had more time. We could have done another interview. But we just love Pesach Wolicki on our Israel tour. Sometimes he will come to our groups and speak. One of the years, he even spent Friday night, Shabbat, at our hotel. And We had a great time with Erev Shabbat, and he taught, I believe, that Shabbat morning as well. But we love Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. His whole thing is he is involved in building bridges between Christians and Jews. And that's what El Shaddai Ministries has also been involved with since we started 20 years ago. He has another project coming that I'll just say they're a Jewish organization is writing a Tanakh specifically for Christians. And it's going to be fantastic. Pictures, everybody loves pictures, all kinds of great things. And so I'm really excited about that. I believe that'll be published sometime this year, and I'm sure we'll have some in stock, and we'll promote it and all that good stuff. But for now, let's welcome my dear good friend, Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. Hey!
Thank you. Now you've had your fun. Thank you very much. It's exciting. I'm turning 50 next week, and I did not expect this. I really do appreciate it. When I get back from this trip, I have a few more places to speak on this trip. I'll be back home next Monday, a week from today, and then Wednesday is my birthday. So thank you very much for that. So I'm currently. I'll just mention a little bit more about what I'm currently doing, more specifically, and not just building bridges between Christians and Jews, but I've recently started working on some pretty extensive projects with the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. You've heard of them. So I've been working with them on some projects that are specifically designed to educate college-age Christians about the Jewish roots of Christianity, including getting course material into their curricula in the Christian colleges that deal with the Jewish roots of Christianity. It's fascinating projects. You'll be hearing more about them as they continue to develop. And as for that Bible that's going to be published, it's an amazing publication. Includes you'll be reading a section of Tanakh, and like right there on the page, you don't have to look at the back and some index, but right there on the page there'll be a map of if it has to do with location, or there will be a picture of a significant archaeological find, or in Leviticus where it lists all the unclean birds, there are full color pictures of those actual birds, so you know exactly what you're talking about, all built into the text. So as you're reading, all of the educational information is built in there. It's really a really cool Bible. They originally wrote a version of this just in Hebrew for the Jewish community, and then they had the idea. They said, well, we should really expose Christians to this too, and they got me involved in the project because I teach Torah to Christians. And Mark has been involved with this, where when I first got involved in it, I said, okay, I want to talk to a few people I know who are involved in teaching Torah to Christians and see what they think of this. So I've been back and forth with Mark on this Bible. So as soon as it's ready for publication, El Shaddai Ministries is probably going to be the first group who's going to hear about this. It's really cool. It's going to be the Bible you're going to want to own. Okay, here's what we're doing tonight. It says here the life of Isaac, but let me explain what's behind this particular talk tonight. Most of the time when we talk about Isaac, when I say we, I mean people of faith, Jews, Christians, people who love the Bible, love God. When we mention Isaac, tends to get mentioned most of the time just when we say the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We rarely talk about Isaac. Just think about it. If I were to ask every one of you, everyone in this room loves the Bible, and everyone in this room loves learning. I mean, you came out on a rainy Monday night, or logged in, if you're online, on a Monday night to study Torah. So I'm assuming that you know the Bible stories. If I ask you to think about Abraham, think about stories about Abraham. You can think about, you kind of know him. You know his personality pretty well. Same thing with Jacob. We tend to know him pretty well. Isaac, let's admit it, we don't know him that well. Do you know what I mean? Do you agree with me? So this talk is based on a study session that I did with my father, who's a rabbi as well. My father may he live and be well, is very healthy, he's 80 years old. He was a rabbi for many, many years. He was a rabbi of a synagogue for over 40 years. And about 20 years ago, a little less, more like about 15 years ago, it was a Shabbat afternoon. He lives around the corner from me in Israel, in Beit Shemesh. And I walked over to his house, as I often do, so that we could just talk and study on Shabbat. And we sat down, and the Torah portion was in the book of Genesis, in the stories that deal with Isaac's life. And we said, we don't know Isaac well enough. Let's sit down and really figure out who he is. So first, the standard understanding of Isaac that I was raised with, and maybe you've heard, is that Isaac, I remember hearing sermon after sermon going to synagogue as a child about how Isaac is all about tradition. Isaac is the one who takes the baton from Abraham and passes it to his son Jacob. Isaac is the one who upholds the traditions of Abraham. He renames the wells the same names as his father Abraham. So much of his life seems to be connected with the life of Abraham. But that wasn't satisfying. See, Isaac actually lived longer than any of the other fathers. Abraham lived 175 years. Jacob lived 147 years. Isaac lived 180 years. And we don't know him that well. By the end of this talk, you will know Isaac very well. And I'm going to be very bold. Not only will you know Isaac very well, but you will know an Isaac you've never known before. And you'll remember him. He will become a personality that you'll go like, oh, that's Isaac. You'll tell me at the end of the night if I was successful, okay? The first slide we have up here is just every single mention of Isaac. As a chronological order, this is the life of Isaac. This is what we have in the Bible of Isaac. We have his birth. We have the next story about Isaac is the binding of Isaac, right? That's probably the most famous Isaac story. If you mention Isaac, the first thing people think of is the binding of Isaac. We then have the scene of his marriage, where Abraham sends the servant to go find a wife, brings back Rebekah, and he marries her. There's then the scene of the death of Abraham, which is not a scene that people can think of the verses so easily. It's one of the more obscure scenes in Genesis, but it's a very important scene, and we'll be looking at it closely later. We then have this very brief scene of he and his wife, Rebekah, praying because they're childless. And then he vanishes for a little while. When the boys are born and they grow up and the selling of the birthright, Isaac's not in that scene. So after the prayer for the children, the next time we have a story that involves Isaac, there's a famine in the land, and he leaves the land and heads down into Philistine territory. On his way down into Philistine territory, God speaks to him and gives him the Covenantal Prophecy. I want to add an important point that applies to the entire book of Genesis. I just mentioned the Covenantal Prophecy. And here I might blow your mind a little bit. You ever notice when you're reading the Bible, God speaks to a prophet? He very often says to the prophet, should I stay in one place because of the live streaming? Is that easier? Okay, I'll stand here. When you're reading the Bible, God will speak to a prophet. You ever notice very often it says that God will say to the prophet, speak to the people of Israel and tell them, Why does God have to do that? I mean, if God gave you a prophecy, wouldn't you go tell people? So listen carefully. There's a rule that you might not have been aware of. Prophets are only allowed to speak the prophecy that God told them to other people if God told them to. If God does not tell a prophet to tell the prophecy to other people, then they're not allowed to tell anyone. It was meant just for them. Why is this so important? It's very important, especially in the book of Genesis. Let me explain. Sometimes people wonder, well, if Rebekah already knew through prophecy that Jacob was going to be the more prominent son, why didn't she just go and tell Isaac? Why did she have to how come Isaac didn't know and she had to deceive him? The answer is actually very simple. God never told Rebekah to tell him. She's not allowed to tell him. And this applies to many other scenes in Genesis. I bring it up here because we assume, like when we're reading Genesis, we have like Abraham gets these promises, right? About the covenant. We assume that as a child, Abraham probably told Isaac about it. Not necessarily. Not necessarily so. Unless God told Abraham to tell Isaac something, he didn't tell him. Right? God already told Abraham that they were going to have a child before the angels come and Sarah hears that they're going to have a child. How come Sarah didn't already know? God told Abraham that Sarah was going to have a child a few chapters before. You know why she didn't know? Because he didn't tell her. Why didn't he tell her? Because God never said tell her. Okay, there's many, many scenes in Genesis that are simply explained by this principle. Okay? So if you've learned anything tonight, at least you have that. Put that in your back pocket. It's a very important principle with prophecy. Prophecies can only be told if that's part of the prophecy. Okay, so the covenantal prophecy here is very important because this is God. God has to speak the covenantal prophecy to Isaac because he's never heard it before. Okay? Got that? Good. So there's a covenantal prophecy, and we'll take a look at it. We have a wife-sister story. We're familiar with those. Abraham had two of them, claiming that the wife is the sister, and then, right? We had one with, Abraham did that with Pharaoh. He did it with Avimelech, and the king of the Philistines, and then Isaac does it as well with the king of the Philistines, with Avimelech. He then farms. He then digs a bunch of wells, and there's all these fights over wells. There's then a treaty of some sort, some kind of treaty with Avimelech. And the final story that involves Isaac is the scene with the blessings of Jacob and Esau, and we all know that story. Now, I said the popular understanding of Isaac is that his life is really all about Abraham. Let's understand where that perception comes from. By the end of the evening, you're not going to have that perception anymore. I'm telling you that now. But let's understand where that reading of Isaac's life comes from. Well, first of all, the most important story in our minds about Isaac is the binding of Isaac. But the binding of Isaac is not a story about Isaac. It really isn't. It's a story about Abraham. If you read the text of that chapter of the binding of Isaac, it starts off, and God spoke to Abraham. God tested Abraham and said to him, take your son, your only son, da, 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 da. And at the end of the binding of Isaac, the angel comes down and speaks to Abraham. The binding of Isaac is not a story about Isaac. Isaac is passive in the story. It's a story about Abraham. Isaac's marriage, he's totally passive. Right? Isaac's marriage is a story about Abraham sending his servant to go get a wife for his son. Even his own marriage isn't a story about him. Right? The main character in the story is Abraham's servant, who's representing Abraham, not Isaac. The famine. We'll see this inside in a moment, but this is just a little this is the end of the intro. The famine in Isaac's life, which begins chapter 26, which we're going to be reading very carefully in a moment, begins that there was a famine in the land besides the famine in the days of Abraham. Like it mentions the famine in Abraham's life when it mentions the famine in Isaac's life. So there's all these references to Abraham seems to be the central figure in Isaac's life. And when the covenantal prophecy is spoken to Isaac, Abraham keeps getting mentioned in those verses. And then there's the wife-sister story, which is a repeat. As anyone reading the Bible knows, when you get to the wife-sister story with Isaac, you go, oh yeah, he's doing what his dad did. Right? It's another reference to Abraham. And then when he digs the wells that his father had dug that the Philistines had filled up, we'll look at that very closely soon, it mentions that he's redigging the wells of his father, and he's renaming them the same names his father gave them. So Abraham's name keeps coming up, and Abraham's behavior keeps getting repeated in the life of Isaac. And then there's a treaty scene with Avimelech, just like his dad had a treaty with Avimelech. His father made a treaty with Avimelech. Isaac makes a treaty with Avimelech. It's like his whole life is just a rerun of Abraham's. And then finally, in the very last scene where Isaac says anything in the Bible, the very last words he says is he blesses Jacob before he goes away to the house of Laban, and he gives him the blessing of Abraham. So Isaac's life seems to be, on the surface, focused on his father. Now, here's what we're going to do for the rest of this talk. We are going to read through Genesis chapter 26, which is the story of Isaac's life. And what I mean by that is that all the stories about Isaac before that are really not about Isaac. It's the binding of Isaac, the marriage of Isaac, where he's not the protagonist, or the blessings where he's being deceived by his wife and his son, where he's also not really the protagonist. The real story of his life, what he accomplished in his life, is Genesis chapter 26. We're going to read Genesis chapter 26 first, and I'm not going to explain anything. We're just going to read it through so we have it in front of us. We're then going to give a little bit of background and explanation, and then we're going to reread it. And when we reread it, based on that background and explanation, we're going to see it with a whole new set of eyes. That's the talk, okay? That's where we're going. That's the journey we're taking now. Everyone ready? Here we go. Now there was a famine in the land besides the previous famine in Abraham's time. And Isaac went to Avimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. Now I want you to please pay attention to locations. This chapter is kind of vague in a lot of people's minds because of two big issues. One is time and one is location. So pay attention to references to time and references to where people are. Okay? So Isaac went to Avimelech, the king of Philistines, in Gerar. If you know what a map of Israel looks like, the patriarchs, that family, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, for a period of time, they lived in the South Hebron Hills, that area. If you're traveling towards Gerar, Gerar is like going out to the coast, sort of modern Israel. It's like going towards Ashdod or Ashkelon, going in that direction, sort of southwest, okay? Which is heading out towards the trade route that leads down to Egypt in ancient times, okay? So Isaac goes to Avimelech, the king of Philistines, in Gerar. Excuse me. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live." Because he's on his way towards Egypt, God says, don't go to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and will give them all these lands, and through your offspring all the nations on the earth will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and did everything I required of him. You see, it's Abraham, Abraham, Abraham. Keeping my commands, my decrees, and my instructions, so Isaac stayed in Gerar. When the men of that place asked him about his wife, he said, "She's my sister," because he was afraid to say she's my wife. He thought, the men of this place might kill me on account of Rebekah because she's beautiful. When Isaac had been there a long time, pay attention to time. When Isaac had been there a long time, Avimelech, king of the Philistines, looked down from a window and saw Isaac caressing his wife Rebekah. The Hebrew word there is mitzachek, which means making laughter, but it's also a word that's used a few times in the Bible as a euphemism for romantic activity of varying kinds. So they were acting like husband and wife. So Avimelech summoned Isaac and said, "She's really your wife. Why did you say she's my sister?" Isaac answered him, "Because I thought I might lose my life on account of her." Then Avimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the men might well have slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Avimelech gave orders to all the people. "Anyone who harms this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." Isaac planted crops in that land, and the same year he reaped 100-fold because the Lord blessed him. The man became rich. His wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. He had so many flocks and herds and servants that the Philistines envied him. So all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines stopped up, filling them with earth. Then Avimelech said to Isaac, "Move away from us. You've become too powerful for us." Isaac moved away from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar, where he settled. Isaac returned and dug the wells that they dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham had died. And he gave them the same names his father had given them. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of fresh water there. Lots of digging going on. It's kind of like your head starts spinning. Oh, digging another well, digging another well. We don't dig wells too often, so we don't really relate to it. We'll get to that in a minute. The herders of Gerar quarreled with those of Isaac and said, "The water's ours." So he named the well Esek, because they disputed with him. They dug another well, but they quarreled over that one also, so he named it Sitnah. He moved on from there and dug another well. At this point, we're like losing our concentration in this, right? This is the most boring Rabbi Wolicki lecture I've ever been to. He moved on from there and dug another well, and no one quarreled over it. He named it Rehovot, saying, "Now the Lord has given us room, and we will flourish in the land." From there he went up to Beersheba. That night the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and will increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." Isaac built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord. There he pitched his tent, and there his servants dug a well. They can't get enough, huh? Meanwhile, Avimelech had come to him from Gerar with Achuzat, his personal advisor, and Phichol, the commander of his forces. Isaac asked them, "Why have you come to me? Since you were hostile to me, you sent me away." They answered, "We saw clearly that the Lord was with you, so we said there ought to be a sworn agreement between us and you. Let us make a treaty with you that you'll do us no harm, just as we did not harm you, but always treated you well and sent you away peacefully. And now you are blessed by the Lord." Isaac then made a feast for them, and they ate and drank. Early the next morning, the men swore an oath to each other. Then Isaac sent them on their way, and they went away peacefully. That day, Isaac's servants came and told him about the well they had dug. This is more than a hobby. They said, "We found water." He called it Shiv'ah, and to this day the name of the town has been Beersheba. Sorry, I didn't get to that slide. Here we go. Okay, that is the chapter. The boring part of the evening is over. So if you've been spacing out and having a hard time concentrating, now you can elbow the person next to you who fell asleep, get them back in, and you can rejoin us, and it should be interesting from here on out. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a few verses, a few scenes that take place before Genesis 26 that give us an insight into what Isaac's life was really about. Based on those insights, we're going to reread chapter 26, and it's going to make a whole lot of sense. Okay, here we go. This is the opening verse. Genesis chapter 22 is the binding of Isaac. The opening verse of the binding of Isaac says this: "Now it came to pass after these things," after what just happened, "that God tested Abraham and said to him, 'Abraham,' and he said, 'Here I am.'" And then we have, "Take your son, go sacrifice him," and the whole scene of the binding of Isaac. Now there's a basic principle in the order of biblical stories that you don't need to be a great scholar to figure out. You just have to be reading carefully. And if you've ever studied with me before, those of you who have, you know that my whole style is you just read the words carefully and you see things you didn't see before, right? We've done this before. So we're going to read this verse carefully. You don't have to be a genius to figure this one out. Most stories in the Bible do not begin by saying, "After that, this happened." Most of the time, you just have the next story. Because it doesn't always say, "After this happened, that happened," when it does say that, what's it telling us? It's telling us that there's some connection between that and this. Because if there was no connection, it would just start the next story. Meaning, the story of the binding of Isaac could have just begun, "God tested Abraham and said to him," and that would have been just fine. Or, "And the Lord spoke to Abraham and said to him," Abraham. And Abraham said, here I am. And take the story from there. But it says, after this happened, God tested Abraham. So what just happened? What is the scene immediately before God tests Abraham with the binding of Isaac? Well, the scene right before it is Abraham making a treaty, a brit, literally a covenant, with Avimelech, the king of the Philistines. And in that scene, Avimelech and Phichol, his commander, who later are going to come to Isaac, they come to Abraham, and they want to make a treaty with him that they're not going to invade each other's property. And Abraham is kind of upset about a well that he had dug that was stolen from him. Avimelech denies any responsibility. Abraham doesn't push the matter at all. Abraham gives a gift. And he makes this treaty with Avimelech. That is the scene immediately before the binding of Isaac. So what's the connection between that scene and the binding of Isaac? So here's the only time in this entire talk that I'm going to quote anything other than the Bible. There was a rabbi who lived in the 11th century, a grandson of Rashi. You've heard of Rashi, the greatest commentator? So his grandson wrote a beautiful commentary on the Torah, and he makes a very powerful point. He says the connection is obvious. Did God tell Abraham to make a covenant with Avimelech, ceding, giving up ownership of a piece of the promised land? No. God was not happy that Abraham did that. Abraham, look, we love Abraham. Abraham's wonderful. But Abraham, he doesn't want to kick out Ishmael. He prays on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah. He loves everybody. Right? Abraham wants to, he's the universalist. He wants everyone in. He doesn't want to exclude anyone. He wants to get along with everybody, and that's a wonderful trait. But sometimes it can be misused. So, Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, makes a very simple point. He says, why does it say after these things God tested Abraham? Because God said to Abraham, Abraham, you're giving up part of the land. Mark, are you paying attention? Okay, good. Okay, good. No. We're just getting going. God says to Abraham, Abraham, you just gave up ownership. You just signed a treaty giving up ownership of part of the land that I promised you. You're trying to secure your borders for the benefit of your children and grandchildren so you'll have peace by giving up part of the land I promised you? What good is that treaty if you go ahead and kill your son? What if you don't even have a son? And that was the test. But the test goes a little deeper than that. We're now going to jump, and just to prove to you that that's what the binding of Isaac was all about. At the end of the binding of Isaac, when the angel comes and stops Abraham and says, don't kill the boy, the angel then tells Abraham that he reiterates the covenant to Abraham. Now, why does he have to reiterate the covenant? Why does he have to repeat the covenant? Because Abraham has accepted this rebuke. He understands that God's not happy with him, and he just gave up part of the promised land. Maybe he lost the covenant. And the angel says, no. You're still going to inherit the land. The covenant is still intact. And, more importantly, everything the angel says to Abraham at the end of the binding of Isaac, he's already said to him, except for one line. Here's what the angel says to Abraham. I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. We've heard that already. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies. This is new. And then the rest of it we've also heard before. And through your offspring, all the nations on the earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. And Abraham settled in Beersheba. Beersheba Beersheba, it was named Beersheba in the covenant with Avimelech. Be'er means well, and Sheva is a very interesting word because it has two meanings. There's a play on words going on in the Bible. At the end of the scene where he makes a covenant with Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, right before the binding of Isaac, he names the place where they made the covenant Be'er Sheva, the well of the oath. Because the word Sheva means oath, but it also means seven. Okay? Keep that in mind for later. So Abraham then goes and lives in the place where he made the covenant with Avimelech. But look at this line. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies. That is the new thing. That's the new thing that came out of the binding of Isaac. Everything else was already told to him multiple times before in the previous covenantal prophecies. What does that mean? Your children, your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies. What does that have to do with the binding of Isaac? I'm going to say something very harsh, but it's very real. The safest, you know what would make all the people, people in Israel, I live in Israel, we're surrounded by hostile enemies who want to kill us, right? Plotting every day, trying to wipe us off the map. You know what would be a great way for us all to be really safe? Is if we all got up and left. Right? We'd all be really safe. We could all move to Tacoma. No danger anymore. Maybe some spiritual dangers, but how come we don't do that? Because life is not just about being safe. It's also about asserting ownership over the land that God has given us. And sometimes that comes at a price. And it might be harsh, but there's a lesson in the binding of Isaac, and that is, if you want to defeat your enemies, you have to be willing to sacrifice your children. My children serve in the Israeli army. 3 of them have served. 1 is currently in a combat unit. That's a reality. You have to be willing to put your kids on the line. And that's what God is teaching Abraham. He's like, what, your whole goal is to make peace with your enemies and you're going to give up the land to make peace with your enemies? No. That's not what it's about. That's the lesson of the binding of Isaac. One more scene before chapter 26. And this is where Abraham is sending his servant to go find a wife for his son. And he has this long preamble when he sends the servant, and we're going to take a close look at it. Abraham said, "Take care, be careful that you do not take my son back there." How come he doesn't send Isaac to go get a wife for himself? No, Isaac can't go there. And he says to the servant, "Go find a wife, but you can't bring Isaac. Do not take my son there." Why? "The Lord God of heaven who brought me out of my father's household and my native land." And there's a lot of ways to describe God. "The Lord who brought me out of there and who spoke to me and promised me with an oath, saying, 'To your offspring I will give this land,' he will send his angel before you so you can get a wife for my son from there." Why is Abraham describing God this way? Because Isaac cannot leave the land of Israel. Be careful that you don't take my son there. God, who told me that this is our land, he's going to be he'll make you successful. He refers to God that way because there's a covenant of land. Abraham is not a native of this land. He's an immigrant. Imagine you have like an Italian immigrant comes over to the United States in the 1920s. And they have children. And then when it comes time to find a wife for their kid, they send a letter back to Italy to send a girl over, right? What does that say about them? That they're still really connected to there. I don't want Isaac leaving. If Isaac leaves the land to go get himself a wife, then it shows that he's not really committed to this place. And we have to make it very clear that we're here to stay. So Isaac ain't leaving. If he leaves, I don't even know if he'll ever come back. Isaac's staying here. And Isaac, in fact, never left the land of Israel. Jacob, of course, left. He left multiple times. He died in exile. Abraham, as I mentioned, wasn't even born there, and then he went down to Egypt at some point. Isaac never leaves the land of Israel. Lives his whole life in the land that God promised. And Abraham knows that it's very important that Isaac never leave. Let's sum this up now. The covenant is made up of various parts. There is the covenant that Abraham embraces to bring blessing to all the families of the earth, to be the father of a multitude of nations. Abraham is a universalist. The mission, the primary mission of Abraham and his descendants is to spread God to all the families of the earth. That's true. But it's a funny covenant because it's not just a universalistic covenant. The covenant that involves spreading God to all the nations of the earth and bringing blessing to all the families of the earth also involves being a separate people with our own land that God gave us. So it's also a particularistic, nationalistic covenant. And that's the part that maybe Abraham didn't embrace so much, as we saw from his treaty with Avimelech. But Isaac's mission in life is going to be to assert ownership over the land that God promised. That is Isaac's mission. And Abraham understands that that's Isaac's mission. He learned his lesson at the binding of Isaac. So he says to his servant, "Do not let my son leave the land. God who promised me this land is in charge. He's staying." Isaac knows that this is his mission. With that in mind, we're now going to reread chapter 26, and we're going to pay close attention to some of the little boring details, and they won't be so boring, and we're going to get to know a really different Isaac. Here we go. There was a famine in the land, besides the previous famine in Abraham's time. Why is that so important? What did Abraham do when there was a famine? He went to Egypt. He left the land. I'm not saying that Abraham sinned, but Abraham left the land. So the Bible is telling you, the reader, you've read about Abraham. You started the Bible at the beginning and you're reading this wonderful book. And Abraham goes to the land that God shows him, and then there's a famine and he leaves. If an immigrant comes into a land and as soon as there's trouble, he gets out of there, he's obviously not so committed to this new place. He's going wherever it's convenient. Oh, there's jobs in America, I'll go there. If there's no jobs in America, I'll leave. Right? So now it's like, okay, it's the life of Isaac. There's a famine. And the Bible's telling you, just like the famine in the days of Abraham, let's see what Isaac does. So Isaac starts heading in the same direction. He's on his way, as I mentioned, heading towards Philistine territory, is heading in the direction of Egypt. Isaac went to Avimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. Why does it mention Avimelech? He didn't go to the king. He went to Philistine territory. Well, because Abraham made a covenant with Avimelech, didn't he? He gave up part of the promised land. So there's a real question that we could ask at this point. Is Philistine territory part of the land? Is he leaving the land or not? Well, according to the agreement his father made, it seems like he's leaving because his father gave up part of the land. But we don't have the right to give up land that God gave us. So Isaac goes, it's getting a little bit political, isn't it? So what? Right? So Isaac goes to the land of the Philistines in Gerar. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land." Now again, so God's on board with this plan that Isaac's never supposed to leave. Right? Don't go down to Egypt. Don't do what your dad did. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Okay, we're all ears. Stay in this land. What's this land? Where is he? No, where is he? He's in Gerar. Pay attention to where he is. He's in Philistine territory, which is part of the promised land. Let's not use the word Israel. That's a modern term. It's just going to confuse us. It is Israel, but he's in Gerar. Gerar is that, let's call it disputed territory. Gerar is that territory that's part of the promised land, but Abraham gave it up in a treaty and got in trouble for it. Isaac goes there. God says, I want you to live where I tell you to live. And you know where that is? Right here. Stay in this land, and I'll be with you and I'll bless you. For to you and your descendants, look at the words carefully, I will give all these lands, and I will fulfill the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. In other words, don't worry about the fact that your dad made a covenant and made a treaty and gave up these lands. I don't pay attention to that, says God. God says to Isaac, don't worry about that. The covenant of land is still in force, and it still includes these properties. I'm giving them to you. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. And again, look at this. I will give them all these lands. He keeps saying these lands. And Isaac is in Philistine territory. And through your offspring, all the nations on the earth will be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed me. Don't think that that even though your father got rebuked, even though he shouldn't have made that treaty, don't worry about it. I don't hold it against him. The covenant is still in force. Abraham obeyed me and did everything I required of him, keeping my commands, my decrees, and my instructions. So Isaac settled, and the Hebrew word is vayeshev. Vayagor means to live somewhere temporarily. Vayeshev means he settled. He put down roots in Gerar. Okay, it's on. Oh, sorry, I didn't flip the slide. Because Abraham obeyed me, Isaac settled in Gerar. Are we getting the picture of what Isaac's life is about? It's going to get better. When the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, she's my sister. So here he's doing what his dad did because he was afraid to say she's my wife. He thought the men of this place might kill me on account of Rebekah because she is beautiful. When Isaac had been there a long time, whoa. Okay. Why did Isaac go there? Why did he go there? There was a famine. He's been there a long time. Now, I don't know how long a long time is, but it's not 6 months. In biblical terms, a long time means he's been there for years. He's been there a long time. So the Philistines start realizing that he's not just here temporarily to live out the famine. When he first shows up, they're like, yeah, we remember when his dad did this. He came down, he was here for a little while, and then he left. No problem, no big deal. Isaac shows up. Okay, he's here. No big deal. Let's see how long he stays. Oh, he's not leaving. Oh, he's still here. Why is this guy still here? So Avimelech says, I got to get rid of this guy. And that's why this verse actually makes sense, because what does the first half of the verse have to do with the second half of the verse otherwise? What does the fact that Avimelech notices him being romantic with his wife have to do with how long he'd been there? Because it's not what it was about. Avimelech needed to get rid of him. And he needed an excuse to get rid of him. So he started following him. He starts looking. Maybe he's got his KGB agents watching him. We got to get rid of this guy. He's been here too long. When Isaac had been there a long time, Avimelech, king of the Philistines, looked down from a window and saw Isaac pleasing his wife Rebekah. So Avimelech summoned Isaac and said, she's really your wife. How'd you say she's my sister? Isaac answered, because I thought I might lose my life. Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting to flip the slide. Because I thought I might lose my life on account of her. Then Avimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the men might well have slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. Avimelech commanded all the people, anyone who harms this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Now, what's going to happen next? He's tried to mix it up with Isaac, maybe make him feel a little bit uncomfortable. Isolating him a little bit. So what's Isaac's response? Isaac planted crops. Look at this verse, how carefully worded it is. He planted crops in that land. Couldn't this verse if the point of the verse is that he planted crops and became wealthy, it could have said, and Isaac planted crops and the same year reaped 100-fold because the Lord had blessed him. But it says Isaac planted crops in that land. See, that's an important rule in reading verses in the Bible. If you could delete a few words and the story's kind of the same, those are important words, and now you got to really think about them. In that land. The whole point of this verse is that he planted crops. Now, what did Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, look, when you think about the forefathers. What did they do for a living? They were shepherds. They were all shepherds. They always talk about their flocks, and Jacob's sons are tending the flocks. They are not farmers. The only one who it mentions farmed is Isaac. You see, you can still kind of be a sojourner in someone else's property if you're grazing your sheep. If you're planting crops, you can only plant crops in land that is yours. You are asserting ownership. You are expressing permanence. And by the way, as I wrote here, famine? What famine? He just planted crops and had a massive bumper crop. There is no famine. Why doesn't he go home? This whole story started that there was a famine, and that's why he went to Gerar. The famine's long gone. He's having great prosperity. He's planting crops. He's not going anywhere. And he's living the whole time in Gerar. Why is he living in Gerar? Because God told him to. Very simple. God said, stay where I tell you to live. God's in on this plan with Isaac. And the plan is to undo the peace treaty that gave up land. So Isaac, live where I tell you to live. Live right here and don't leave until it's time to go. And Isaac stays there and stays there and stays there and plants crops and sets down roots. And even when Avimelech tries to mix it up and intimidate him, he responds by planting. He is there to stay. The man became rich. His wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. And again, the simple reading of the Bible before you walked in tonight, if you were reading this, you should be asking yourself, why isn't he going home? He had so many flocks and herds and servants that the Philistines envied him. And all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines had stopped up and filled them with earth. Now, this is a nutty thing to do. You know, the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, that land, if you know anything about it, to this day in our politics and how we think about weather, it's a land that relies on rainwater and underground aquifers. We don't have natural water resources like the Nile River or big lakes and rivers. Israel, water's always an issue. The peace treaty with Jordan involved who gets the water, all the negotiations. There's always water's a big deal in the Middle East. If you have wells that are functioning wells, the dumbest thing to do is block them up. This kind of reminds me when Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip, and also back in 1982 when they pulled out of the Sinai Peninsula and left behind greenhouses and factories. What did the Arabs do? They destroyed them. Why didn't they use them? Because they wanted to erase all evidence that we were there. So the Philistines, what did they do? There were wells that Abraham had dug in that area. The Philistines filled them up with earth. They erased them. So Avimelech then comes to Isaac and says, now he's just going to be more direct and more aggressive. Move away from us. You've become much more powerful than us. Get out of here. Now he's being direct. Let's see what Isaac does. Pay close attention to locations, as I said before. Isaac moved away from there and encamped. Where did he go? Did he go back to Beersheba? Did he go back to the South Hebron Hills? He encamped in the valley of Gerar. How far did he go? Not very far. He encamps in the valley of Gerar and he settled there. And then Isaac returned. Now here, this is interesting. If you look in your English translations, in your Christian translations, it will not say he returned and redug the wells. It'll just say he redug the wells. And the reason for that is that the Hebrew word vayashov means to return, but it also means to do something again. So most of the translations just say he dug the wells again. Okay? But that's a redundant word. If he dug the wells from the time of his father, then of course he redug them. The word vayashov here, in its literal sense, just means he went back. Okay? Just like in English, I can say to go back, and I don't mean literally to go back with your body, but I mean to do something over again. Like someone wrote something, and I give it back and say, go back over this. It just means do it again, right? So that's the word vayashov. But the literal meaning, he returned. So he doesn't go Avimelech tells him to get lost. He moves away a little bit and then comes right back. And what does he do? He redigs the wells that they dug in the time of his father Abraham. Excuse me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol niyeh bidvaro. I didn't hear an amen. Thank you. Gosh. Where am I? Mark, Isaac returned and redug the wells. Isaac returned and redug the wells that they dug in the time of his father Abraham. So, this is important. When the Romans captured Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, they also renamed the city of Jerusalem. They took away the name. They gave it a different name. They renamed all the places. And when Israel reconquered these territories, when the state of Israel was born and we took these lands, we researched and found out the biblical names of places and gave them their old names back. Names of places is a very important a way to assert ownership. So Isaac, this is a public works project. He goes and he redigs the wells from his father's time. He finds out where they were, digs them back up, and gives them those names again. Puts up signs with the same names. This is reasserting the original ownership over the land of Israel. And he gave them the same names his father had given them. So this is war. Avimelech told him to get lost. He did the exact opposite. He didn't just not leave, but he's redigging the wells. Isaac's servants dug in. So now he's not done. It's not enough. He's not just going to redig the wells of his father. That could seem like sentimentalism. You really want to show ownership? Go a step further. That's what Isaac does. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and they found a well of fresh water. So, naturally, the herders of Gerar quarreled with the herders of Isaac and said, "The water's ours." So he named the well Esek, which means dispute, because they disputed with him. So what's his response? Oh, we dug a well and there was an outcry, CNN, oh, they're digging wells, they're expanding settlements, oh, what do we do? Build another one. They dug another well, and they quarreled over that one. So what did he do? He named it Sitnah. Sitnah means hatred or antipathy. There was an outcry over that one, right? There was an outcry. Every time he digs a well, there's an outcry. World media, condemnations in the UN. He's digging wells. So he moved on from there and dug another well. And this is a lesson about politics in the Middle East. They stopped fighting. The way you get the enemy to back down is you keep moving forward. He named it Rechovot, expansion, saying, now the Lord has expanded us and we have flourished in the land. The land that God promised, which includes Gerar. Now he's ready to go home. Now that victory has been attained, they've stopped disputing our ownership. Now our work is done. And then he goes back up to Beersheba. That night, the work has been done. He's fulfilled the mission to reassert ownership over the disputed territory that his father had given up. The Lord appeared to him and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid. I'm with you. Meaning, he's basically saying, good job. I will bless you and I'll increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. Isaac built an altar there. Why did I underline there? He's in Beersheba. Remember why Beersheba was called Beersheba? Beersheba is the place where the original peace treaty with Avimelech was signed. That's where he chooses to go live now. Isaac built an altar there and called in the name of the Lord. There he pitched his tent, and there Isaac's servants dug a well. Notice the text is in the Hebrew, it's sham, there. The text is emphasizing that he's doing all of this in Beersheba, in the place of the original problematic peace treaty. So, the next scene is, meanwhile, Avimelech comes to him from Gerar with Achuzat, his personal advisor, and Fichol, the commander of his forces. Now, Isaac's not like his dad. Remember, his dad was very conciliatory. He made a little complaint about something, but then backed off, gave gifts. Isaac's not like that. We've already gotten to know Isaac at this point in the evening. Isaac talks tough. Isaac basically says to them, get off my lawn. Isaac said to them, what have you come to me for? You despise me. You sent me away from you. Like, what are you doing here? That's how he talks to Avimelech. So they said, well, we saw clearly that the Lord was with you, so we said, let there be a sworn agreement between us and you. Let us make a covenant with you. Notice the word covenant, brit. The word brit, covenant, was the word used for the agreement that Abraham made with Avimelech. And I underline it to point out that Isaac will never make a covenant with them. Avimelech asks for a covenant, but that's not what he's going to get. Let's make a covenant that you will do us no harm, just as we did not harm you, and just as we always treated you well and sent you away peacefully. And now you're blessed by the Lord. Isaac made a feast for them. They ate and drank. Early the next morning, they swore an oath to each other, which is that's not a covenant. That's kind of like a greeting. Then Isaac sent them on their way, and they went away peacefully. No covenant. That day, Isaac's servants came and told him about the well they had dug. They said, we found water. So look at this verse. This verse is fascinating. He called it Shiv'ah, which means 7. For this reason, says the Bible. For this reason. I want to underline this 5 times. For this reason, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. Okay, this is really cool. Isaac does want to respect his father. He reveres his father, and he doesn't want to disrespect his father. But he also wants nothing to do with that original problematic peace treaty. His father named this place Beersheba, which means the well of the oath, referring to the covenant that he made with Avimelech. So what does Isaac do here? He renames it Beersheba to give it the same name as his father, but because of the play on words, that Sheva means oath, but it also means 7, and this is the 7th well, he names it Beersheba, the 7th well. So he gives it the same name, but for a different reason. So it's still called Beersheba, but not because of the peace treaty, but because of the 7 wells he had dug. That's the punchline of chapter 26. That he's asserting the covenant of land that was originally a covenant with Abraham, but he doesn't want any part of the concessions that Abraham made. Now, the death of Abraham is a very interesting scene. I mentioned it at the beginning of our talk tonight. We're right near the end, Mark. Be patient. This is the end. This is the end. The very end, when Abraham dies, Ishmael, who had been banished, resurfaces. He's at the funeral. Right? He's at the funeral. And here's the scene of the death of Abraham. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Now notice, who's older, Isaac or Ishmael? Ishmael, of course. Notice that Isaac's name is mentioned first. That's very important. The Bible's making a clear point here to say not only that Isaac is the more prominent son, but that Ishmael submitted to that. Ishmael agreed. He's back, and he has accepted his secondary status. He knows that he's not inheriting Abraham. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, son of Tzohar, the Hittite, in the area of Mamre. Let me just add in, I just said that Ishmael accepted his secondary status, but he still views himself as a son of Abraham. He is a son of Abraham, and he's back in the picture. He didn't vanish after he was banished. He came back. So they're going to bury him in the cave of Machpelah. Verse 10, the field that Abraham had bought from the Hittites, there Abraham was buried as well as his wife Sarah. And now we have a very cryptic verse. After Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac. Isaac settled at Be'er Lachai Roi. So he settled, again, that's the word settled, but Yeshev, like he sets down roots. After Abraham dies, Isaac goes ahead and he sets down roots at Be'er Lachai Roi. And there's a very strange word that it just looks like a mistake in the Bible, God forbid. We were just talking about that over dinner, that people like to fix God's errors, God's syntax errors. But the word here, instead of saying that he lived at Be'er Lachai Roi, the Bible says im, which means with. That's not the way you talk. I wouldn't say that, if you live in this town, that you live with Sumner, Washington. You live in Sumner, Washington, or at. You don't say with. So to say someone lived with a certain place is a very bizarre way to say that they lived somewhere, but that's literally what the Hebrew says. Vayeshev Yitzchak im Be'er Lachai Roi. You speak Hebrew, right? That's what the pasuk says. That's what the verse says, which literally means that he lived with. It sounds like incorrect Hebrew, right? That's what the Bible says. But the Bible has a kind of poetry to it. If it says that he lived with it, it means that there was some kind of connection that he had with this place. Now, Be'er Lachai Roi is a very strange place for Isaac to choose to live. And it also, notice the verse. The verse makes reference to the fact that this is after Abraham's death, this is where he went to live. Almost like it was a response to the death of Abraham. Abraham dies, so Isaac decides, as a result of the death of Abraham, to go set down roots at Be'er Lachai Roi. Now, at this point, we know that if Isaac decides to go set down roots somewhere, he's got an agenda. There's a reason he's doing that. And this has everything to do with the fact that Abraham just died. Be'er Lachai Roi, I say that's a weird place for him to go live, because Be'er Lachai Roi is in the middle of the desert. Why on earth would someone want to go live there? Anyone familiar with the place Be'er Lachai Roi? Okay. You don't know where it is? You don't know what happened there? Well, you got to know. Got to read your Bible. Here we go. Genesis, we're going to go all the way back to Genesis chapter 16. Hagar, the maidservant of Sarah, has been given as a wife to Abraham so that she could have a child that, according to the laws of the time, would be viewed as Sarah's child. She's a servant. She gets pregnant and she gets arrogant and she's disrespecting Sarah, and Sarah chases her away. And she runs out into the desert, and there God speaks to her. She has a prophetic vision. And God blesses her and tells her that her son will be named Ishmael and that he too will become a great nation. And she's so taken by the fact that God then reveals a well to her of water, so she has something to drink. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, indeed, I have now seen after he has seen me. She's just blown away by the fact that she's had a prophecy. God has seen me, and I'm alive to tell about it. That is why the well was called Be'er Lachai Roi, literally the well to the living one who sees me. Be'er, the well, Lachai, to the one who is alive, Roi, who sees me. It is still there between Kadesh and Bared. Now, why does it tell us where it is? To tell us that it's really in the middle of the desert. Kadesh is in the desert. That's where the people of Israel are camped when they send the spies back in the book of Numbers. I mean, it's in the desert. It's down south where the Negev meets the Sinai. So after Abraham dies, Isaac decides to go live there. Why? I think it's very simple. I'll tell you why. Ishmael's back in the fold. Ishmael knows that he's not inheriting the land. But it's perfectly reasonable for Ishmael to say to Isaac, look, Isaac, I know that you inherited Abraham and you get the land. But there's one particular place where God revealed himself to my mother. And that place is sacred to me. That place is mine. So Isaac goes and lives there. So when Abraham dies and his children come to inherit him, Isaac goes and asserts his ownership over Be'er Lachai Roi. Because all of the land that God promised Abraham goes to Isaac. Not to Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, and not to Ishmael. That is what the life of Isaac is all about. The life of Isaac, we've been raised. I don't know whose phone that is, but please turn it off. Okay. We've been raised to see Isaac as this kind of passive character, living in the shadow of his father. Maybe he's a little bit removed from reality. He's a little bit, people view him as spiritual. They don't understand him. That's not who Isaac was. Isaac was a tough dude. Isaac was a strong person. There is a time to be universalistic and inclusive like Abraham. But there's also a time to be strong, to speak the truth, and there's a time for nationalism. And those are both part of the covenant. And that strength and that assertion of ownership over the covenant of land is the mission of the life of Isaac. Now we know who he is. Is he different than we knew him before? Did I live up to my prediction? So, folks, I just want to, to bless you that you should take from this. What I always say is that read the Bible carefully. You'll notice, other than that one comment from Rashi's grandson, I didn't quote any commentaries. I didn't even bring other verses from elsewhere in Scripture. All we did was read the chapter carefully, paying close attention to every little detail. That land, planting, returning. Where does he go? How long has he been there? Paying close attention to what God says to Abraham. Don't let Isaac leave. Don't go down to Egypt. Renaming the wells. These are all, we have to read the Bible carefully. Read it carefully. Stop on every word. Nitpick. It's all in there. This is one chapter. This is the life's work of Isaac. And we need Isaac's message today more than ever. There are plenty of people saying the water is ours. Get out of here. This isn't your land. This place is sacred to us. And we need to have the strength of Isaac to stand there and say, basically, get off my lawn. So thank you very much. God bless you.
Well, hey, I just want to say one thing. Quiz now. When Isaac showed the fortitude, the chutzpah, to say, this is our land, and he named that, the living one who sees me, and I'm going to do what he said, this is my land. How old was Isaac when Abraham died? When he did that, how old was Isaac when Abraham died and he asserted that authority? Okay, I'll give you a hint. How old was Abraham when he died? 175. How old was Abraham when Isaac was born? So how old is Isaac when he asserted that authority over the land? Israel was a nation in 48. You had 75 years. That's 2023. Could that be the time that Israel again asserts its authority over the land? I would hope so. But, we're here totally against any kind of two-state solution. We're against dividing the land of Israel, and this just kind of helps solidifies it, doesn't it? And so anyway, this is why we have to hope and pray that if for some reason with this great peace plan that's coming, that there are some people like Naftali Bennett and Shaked, they're saying there's no way this is happening. And so, why many people support Trump, we have to make sure he knows in no uncertain terms that you cannot divide the land of Israel. Amen? Amen. He said he'll answer a couple questions. Does anyone have any question that they'd like to ask real quick? Okay, just a second.
Okay, so where does it say that if you're given a prophecy by God that and you're not told to share it with anybody, that it's implied?
Exactly. It doesn't say it anywhere, but what I just told you explains a lot of things, right? And it's implied by the fact that that the prophecies that are told, you tend to see God saying, "Tell people," right? So why would he have to tell? Why would God sometimes say, "Tell the people," blah blah blah, and sometimes he doesn't? And again, it explains a lot of behavior. A lot of the behavior in the book of Genesis that we kind of scratch our heads, as I pointed out, the examples I gave you really pointed out. Once you understand this principle, it's just like, oh yeah, that's why Rebecca didn't tell Isaac about her prophecy about the boys. That's why there's lots of I gave you examples. Like the reason we don't see that. No, we don't see that. We don't see that. But this is it's a simple principle, and it makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. If people, if God wants people to know something, and sometimes it's important to a story that this person know and this person not know, So if it's just a free for all and you can tell everyone everything, that would also be a problem. Because then who do you tell and who don't you tell? So it's let's keep it simple. God tells you something. If part of the prophecy is tell it, and who to tell it to, that's who you tell it to. If he doesn't tell you to tell it to anyone, keep it to yourself. Okay?
And I see this true oftentimes in Christian circles that are in the prophecy movement. They always believe that if they receive something, that is for everyone in the whole world to know. No, God may have told you it is just for you, and it's not for you to share. So that's very important in that movement within Christianity. That a lot of people have school for the prophets, and they teach little first graders, second graders how to prophesy. They go around prophesying. They don't even understand a lot of the prophetic principles. Okay, question here.
Hi, I'm sorry I got so excited earlier. I'm a monthly supporter of International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. And when I heard that you were working to bridge the gap between Christians and Jews, that made me really happy. Have you worked along with Jerusalem Prayer Team as well as International Fellowship of Christians and Jews?
No, I've never been involved with the Jerusalem Prayer Team. Never have. I know who they are, wonderful people, but no.
Shalom, Erev Tov. Hi, good evening. Okay, this bring me a question. I've done for almost 7 years as a peace activist, and we try to bring between Palestinian and Israeli. I'm a part of the parents circle, Mishpachot Shkolot. So it's here to bring me a question, and we've been asked this question, and of what you were telling us, and the life of Isaac and the life of Abraham. Is the conflict, is it territorial? Is the conflict religion and spiritual, or it's a politics? Like I see today that what you just explained, I see the Netanyahu, the Likud party, no give up of the land that God promised us. I'm not trying to be politics, but this is a fact. We see the Labour Party in Israel, they are Abraham. To me, that they say, okay, we can make a treaty, with the Philistine or with the Arab. So where are we standing?
Well, and those treaties have never really led to more peace. They've never led to less bloodshed. They've never led to what the people who make those treaties think they're going to lead to. When Avimelech and Fichol come to visit Isaac, and they start speaking so respectfully to him, they did that as a result of the fact that he stayed strong and asserted his position. You mentioned Netanyahu and the Likud party and how they say we're not ceding any land. There's another interesting thing about Netanyahu and the Likud party. Today, right now, the state of Israel has better relationships with Arab countries than it's ever had. With Saudi Arabia, with the United Arab Emirates, with Egypt, with many Arab countries. Israel has a better and more open relationship with the Arab world than it's ever had before. And isn't it interesting that's happened under the most right-wing prime minister we've ever had? And that's because the rules of the game in the Middle East are the same as they were in the days of Isaac. If you assert your strength and you don't back down and you speak plainly, that's where you gain respect. And that's because, going back to the beginning of what you said, this is not really about territory. They know it too. It's not about territory. It's about power and control. And once you let them know that you're not going to be pushed around, they're willing to talk. Where is this all going to end? We don't know. But we know what doesn't work. And what doesn't work is showing weakness, giving in, ceding ownership. All that leads to is greater aggression. You notice that Abraham made a treaty with them. And it says right there in the verse that we read that after Abraham died, they destroyed all of his wells. They didn't do it while he was alive. But why'd they destroy his wells after he died? They had a treaty with him. Because they didn't view it as a peace treaty. They viewed it as asserting their ownership. And they wanted to make sure that they erased all record of any previous owners. You know, the politics in this story are exactly the same as they are today. Exactly the same. Everyone's behavior is exactly the same as today. And the lessons here, and that's why I close by saying we need the lessons of Isaac here. We need them at the negotiating table. We need them. There's a lot of lessons here. They're not just spiritual lessons; they're political lessons as well. Right. Yeah, we learn lessons. We learn them the hard way. That's the way we are as people. But I don't believe that this dispute's really about land. Look, the PLO was started in 1964, before the 6-Day War. What was it about then? It wasn't about the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, because those were in the hands of the Egyptians and the Jordanians. The PLO was founded in order to destroy the state of Israel. And that's still why, what's at the forefront of their mind. And that's why when under Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak, when Yasser Arafat was offered 97% of the disputed land he was offered to make a Palestinian state, Arafat said no. Why did he say no to 97%? Because he doesn't want an agreement. They don't want an agreement. And that's why, by the way, Mark, I'm not worried about Trump's plan, because it has nothing to do with what we want. The other side is never going to agree to an agreement. Right. So, and that is, to quote the famous quote by Abba Eban, that the Arabs have never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
I just want to add that land for peace, another way of saying what he's already said, land for peace never works. I mean, they gave away the Gaza Strip, and all they use it is they let Hamas come in and launch rockets. Who was the first Jew to promote land for peace? King Solomon. He tried to give away 5 cities of the Galilee, and that didn't work very well. The kingdom ended up getting divided after him. So anyway, let us learn from that. Let's give him a big hand. Yay! And happy birthday, 50 years old. All right, the Lord bless you. You're dismissed. Greet one another and come and tell him happy birthday. Oh, yeah. Okay, wait. All right, here, I got this in my hand and I forgot. All right. We need tables set up in here. We need to turn this back around like it was. If people would just help. You notice these are the 2 posts that are back there. We just need 3 rows of tables with chairs around them. If people would just help. For now, just spin the chairs, and then we'll put the tables in between them. Thanks. Yeah, two people come help Tony.